Hello! Last time we talked about how to move and dodge in bullet hell shmups, but of course that's not enough. You also have to shoot and attack. And here too there are certain key points that can quickly elevate your play to the next level if you learn them. You want to take control of the whole screen and take the battle to the enemy. If you're anything like me, your first time playing bullet hell may look something like this. The bullets are so intimidating that you instinctively pull back and just hug the bottom edge of the screen, only moving left and right like you're the turret from Space Invaders. And no offense to Space Invaders, it is the first shmup after all. But unless you're actually playing Space Invaders, this isn't necessarily what you want to be doing most of the time. Staying at the bottom of the screen is good in that it gives you the most time to react to enemy fire, but it is bad in that it also gives enemies the most time to fire their attacks. Now, let's take a moment to recall what Japanese super players taught us in the previous video. You need to dodge without dodging, and the best way not to dodge is by not having anything to dodge in the first place. I recently did a clear of Dangan Fever on, and that game is so fast that micro-dodging is very dangerous every time you do it. So the best way to survive is to memorize the enemies that fire the hardest patterns and be ready to destroy them as quickly as possible. And you can do this by getting up from the bottom of the screen and closer to the enemies that you are targeting. Often you can skip entire bullet patterns with this, so you never even have to face the most complex attacks. It's kinda amazing how much easier games can become when you learn to prioritize your targets, when you start controlling the whole screen instead of just being the Space Invaders turret. Now, this doesn't work 100% of the time, and there are sections when you may want to stay at the bottom. Often with boss fights, the patterns can be too dense or just too scary, and of course when you're just starting out with a new game, you have no idea where to be and what to do. But as you get more familiar with the game, try experimenting with playing more aggressively. If that seems too challenging for now, staying slightly below the center of the screen is never a bad option. From there, you can quickly react to almost any situation. Even just kind of holding and defending that position can be a good strategy. Sometimes, if you get very close or even directly on top of the enemies, you can do what's called sealing, where you block the enemies from firing. This can be very helpful, as this again means that there are less bullets on the screen. Something less helpful is that in some games, if you are very fast at destroying enemies, the game will actually create additional enemy waves for you. Usually this isn't too big of a deal, but just keep it in mind, especially if you're wondering why you're sometimes getting more enemies than usual. And of course, if you're going for score, this is what you want to be doing, as more enemies means more points. Now, different games work in different ways, and in some cases there may be no significant advantage to getting closer to the enemy. That's why it's good to know how your weapons work. Now, as always, I'm using cave games as an example because that's what I'm most familiar with, but also because they have this really fundamental switching between two firing modes. So you have the rapid shot and the focus shot, and both of them have their own uses. As a general rule, rapid shot is better for quickly dispatching what we call zako or popcorn. These are the small enemies that appear in large groups but die very easily. And then when you get the bigger threats, you want to keep your focus shot on them because they need to take a lot of damage before going down. Naturally, often there will be overlap with zako flying into your focus shots or the big ships exploding from taking some of your rapid fire. Sometimes you get these sections like in Ketsui Stage 4, where I feel like playing with just the rapid shot is the safest way. But on a basic survival level, you have different shot types for different enemies. Now, this is pretty simple to understand, but what can be a little less intuitive is why these firing modes can sometimes do more damage than usually. With the rapid shot, there can be a limit to how many bullets your ship can put on the screen at once. The bullets you shoot need to exit the screen or hit targets before you can shoot new ones. So the less distance the bullets need to cover, the faster you can shoot new ones. So if you're getting right up in front of your target, the bullets only need to fly a couple of pixels, and that can be like putting a multiplier on your firing rate. Now with the focus shot it gets a little trickier and can vary more from game to game. Like in Ketsui, your focus laser has actually a pretty short range, so if you hang back, you won't even hit some of the enemies. And in any case, you deal the most damage when you lock on to an enemy in Ketsui, and the closer you are, the faster the lock on happens. With Dodonpachi games, you straight up get this laser aura in front of your ship every time you use your focus shot. You can think of it as a melee weapon, like a sword or something that deals extra damage if you can touch the enemy with it. Now, just a moment ago I said that with bosses it's not always possible to get too high on the screen because the patterns are just so intense. But if you're able to do some point blanking, it can speed up the fight somewhat. Sometimes bosses have these small pauses between phases that you can use to your advantage. If you happen to die, don't worry, you can actually turn that into an opportunity to deal some free damage. Usually when you lose a life and respawn, you get a short invincibility period, and that can be an excellent moment to get up close and point blank. With something like Daiojo's true last boss Hibachi, and especially his final pattern, the infamous washing machine, I think you're even expected to use the iframes you get from hypers and respawns. If you just stay back and try to damage Hibachi normally while dodging all of this stuff, you may find it just a tiny bit challenging, but if you get to the washing machine with extra lives in stock, you can point blank yourself to victory. Again, just a quick reminder that these are only general principles, so they are useful, but may not apply to every shmup ever made. So try experimenting and seeing what works and what doesn't. Okay, so you're in control of the screen, you know how to use your weapons, what else can you do to boost your attack? Well, there's also bombing, and this may seem like a very simple topic, like you just bomb and that's it, right? Well, yes and no. I feel like there's an art to bombing as well, and it actually took me a long time to learn, and even now I'm still kinda struggling with it. In most games you get a limited amount of bombs that you can use to empty the screen of bullets or to do lots of extra damage quickly. I think when you're starting out and all the patterns are just too much, it's only natural to use your bombs as these get out of jail free cards where you bomb when the enemy bullets get overwhelming. And of course, bombs can be used this way. It's better to lose a bomb than a life after all. But what happened to me is that I carried this beginner mentality with me for too long. I learned to hoard my bombs in case I ended up in an impossible situation with no way out. In reality, what always ended up happening was that I would die and lose my runs with unused bombs in stock. And there's a very good reason for this. In games where you're constantly dodging hundreds of bullets, it can be very difficult to know when you're actually about to die and when you're just doing some sweet micro-dodging, and this was a major source of frustration for me. I encourage everyone not to repeat my mistake. Instead, keep in mind the original intention of bombs. When Toaplan made Tiger Heli in 1985, the first shmup to have bombs in the way that we understand them today, the point was to have this special weapon that you deploy to do this super powerful attack. They were meant as an offensive measure, not as an emergency tool. When you start thinking of bombs in this way, I feel like games become more fun and you also end up surviving much deeper into the game. And this is a kind of an important point in itself, in my opinion. Like, it's better to have slightly imperfect early levels with a little bomb spam, if it means that you get a chance to try your hand at the later levels, than to play perfectly but having your runs terminate at like stage 3 most of the time. And as you learn the game better, you also start identifying the best places to bomb. Of all the shmups I've played, I've put the most time into Dodonpachi Daiojo. The black label version of that game is the only shmup I've done a no-miss run of, meaning I've cleared the first loop without dying once. At this point I basically have the game memorized, like I could shut my eyes and play through the whole 20-minute first loop inside my head. And still, just about every time I get to the last phase of stage 3 boss, I bomb. I've done some practice on the pattern and can do it most of the time, but if I spend a bomb here, I can get through it 100% of the time. And that's a pretty good deal in my books. I know that's not optimal for scoring, but it fits my purposes. And that's what's so cool about planned bombs, because you can basically choose to skip the sections that give you the most trouble, every time. With some games, there are these strange quirks where the bosses absolutely melt when you bomb them in specific phases. Like the stage 5 boss in Esperate is quite challenging normally, but if you can survive up until the mid-fight and then charge up your barrier attack, you can just make the boss go away. So if you're playing a game and get a pattern that you just can't dodge, maybe you don't have to dodge it, just use a bomb. So to summarize, number 1, get up from the bottom of the screen and destroy the most dangerous enemies first. Number 2, learn how to use your weapons most effectively and point blank to do extra damage. And number 3, use your bombs to attack and to skip difficult sections. Don't hoard them as an emergency solution because you will die with them. Again, as we discussed last time, instead of reacting to the game, you want to make the game react to you, to shape it into what you want it to be. And for me, that's the beauty of bullet hell. Like, these games may look exceedingly simple, like you just fly around and shoot. But when you've gotten enough experience and practice, you start to get this feeling of being able to turn around this huge tidal wave that previously just swept you along. And you do this by considering your movements and shots carefully. That's when the magic happens and Danmaku begins. Thanks for watching.